Dear colleagues and partners, welcome to the 6th webinar on the TurboCloud webinar series. I'm very keen to have so many people joining today. We got a high number of registrations. Thank you so much. It also shows that it is a topic that is highly discussed at the moment, and a lot of people are excited to get news about it. So, to give you a bit of the background, our webinar series aims to exchange experiences and good practices among our members as well as other interested colleagues. It seems urban development has never been discussed as it has been this year, so today we'll be speaking about the Habitat 3 process and the new urban agenda. Since some of you seem to be new in the Saba web meetings, I would like to give you some technical advice before starting. So if you look on the left on the top of your interface, there are the meeting tools to participate in the webinar. So you have raise your hand, say yes, no, applaud. For everybody, please mute your microphone when you're not speaking to ensure a good understanding of the presenters. To avoid time constraints at the end, we let the two presenters finish their presentations and raise questions at the end, either by raising the hand symbol or send them in the chat. If the chat question is relevant for all, you send it to all. Otherwise, please select the person and address it directly. Our knowledge consultant, Luciana Meyer, is also supporting us, so if you have any technical concerns, please feel free to approach her via the chat. For those of you who don't know about TurboClick, it is a cross-sectoral group combined of the Turvas sector network and the SNGA governance sector network. And we are mainly working on the topics of urban governance and building resilience, low carbon development, capacity development, and inclusive cities. So today we'll speak about Habitat 3 and the new urban agenda. Habitat 3 is the United Nations Conference on Housing and Sustainable Urban Development to take place in Quito, Ecuador in October, which aims at reinvigorating the global commitment to sustainable urbanization and to focus on the implementation of the new urban agenda. The new urban agenda is the outcome document agreed upon at the Habitat 3 and will guide the efforts around urbanization of a wide range of actors. Nation-states, city and regional leaders, international development funders, United Nations programs, and civil society for sure, for the next 20 years. It is necessary to promote a new model of urban development that is able to integrate all facets of sustainable development to promote equity, welfare, and shared prosperity. It is time to think urban, how to mobilize the global community and focus all levels of urban settlements like market towns, intermediate cities, and metropolis, including the linkages to their hinterlands and rural areas for sustainable development. So we're excited to present and discuss now what is the current status of the process and the zero draft of the new urban agenda with a special focus on climate change and resilience. And what are the roles of GIZ and the German ministry to support these processes? So on the agenda for today, we have two presentations. The first will be Habitat 3 in the historic context, the process, the expected outcomes, and the zero draft new urban agenda. It will be presented by Max Lohmann. He's a policy advisor for urban development and part of a team advising the German delegation in the Habitat 3 preparatory process. He has been working with GIZ for 2 years now. Before joining GIZ, he was an analyst for the UNOPS Partnerships Office in Washington, D.C. He obtained his master's degrees in international relationships. The second presentation is about the new urban agenda and its contribution to mitigate climate change and foster resilience. Ms. Barbara Scholz is advisor of the sector project Sustainable Development of Metropolitan Regions. As an urban and regional planner and expert in national urban policies and legal frameworks, she has more than 20 years of practical and academic experience in Ecuador, Germany, Colombia, and Chile. Ms. Scholz is a long-standing co-worker of the German Development Cooperation, Lincoln Institute of Land Policies, Bauhaus University Weimar, among others. In addition, she was also part of the team advising the Ecuadorian and the German delegation in 2016 in the Habitat 3 preparatory process. And at the end, we will have an interactive discussion, so you will also be able to raise questions in addition to the questions in the chat. We're now looking forward to an interesting discussion, and I will hand over to Mr. Max Lohmann.
Thank you. I hope everyone can hear us here in Bonn. The brief structure of this outlook, or this general introduction to Habitat 3 that I'll be giving is sort of goes through the steps of first putting Habitat 3 in the context of the international policy scene at the moment, following by giving a sort of look into the past, what has happened with these conferences throughout the past 40 years, then briefly outlining the process and I guess giving a short outlook, possibly also a question for discussion afterwards, into what will happen once we adopt this new urban agenda and implementing it actually. This also sort of ties into what Barbara then will sort of add with concerning a more specific focus with regard to climate issues. I see some familiar names in here, so some of this might be well known already, but I hope that this sort of general context still really hopes in understanding how also Germany understands the opportunities of this process. Now, this general overview of what has happened throughout the past 2 years is important to understand this potential. On this slide, you can see that the three big conferences of 2015, the Financing for Development Conference in Addis Abeba, the SDG Summit in September in New York, and the Climate Conference COP21 in Paris, were really landmarks in international development policy. Those were huge conferences that attracted a lot of attention internationally in major news outlets. So these were really large and well recognized in conferences. And Habitat 3 follows these conferences in 2016, not because someone thought that would be a good idea, but kind of by accident. Nonetheless, Germany and also we consulting the German position in the process feel that this accident should really be taken advantage of, because it's a sort of a well-placed opportunity to take those three large conferences that have gained all this momentum and translate them into actionable and sort of implementation-oriented projects, initiatives, and the like. So we're collecting all this. We're trying to collect all this momentum from the past year, carrying it forward into implementation into this year. And there's a brief outline that you can already see here. We have recently seen the zero draft of the new urban agenda, which was released in early May. We're actually preparing at the moment for PrepCom 3. That's the third preparatory committee meeting for Habitat 3 in Indonesia, which will take place in late July. And in October, then heads of states and governments and civil society will gather in Quito to adopt the new urban agenda. Thinking about this bridge between 2015 and 2016, the three major conferences in 2015 and Habitat 3, we have identified, with help of some consultants and studies, that there's actually a systematic link between the SDGs and the climate agenda and the local level, the cities. So what we were able to show is that 65% of the targets of the rather concrete targets agreed to in the SDG catalog cannot be achieved without the active involvement of the local level. This picture that you see here, this sort of graph, shows everything that's blue within the 17 goals that are portrayed around the circle. Everything that's blue is dependent on local level implementation efforts if you want to really reach the goals agreed in New York last fall. So this goes for poverty, health, water, energy, the economy, infrastructure, inequality, cities, of course, consumption patterns, climate, and peace. So in this way, it seems natural that Habitat 3 should follow those large conferences in 2015. When you look at the past a little bit now, you see though that this hasn't always been systematically set up in that way. So the first Habitat 3 conference, the first Habitat conference back then, just called Habitat, took place in 1976 in Vancouver, and back then states realized for the first time that urban issues and housing and settlement issues was something that needed further consideration. Up until then, it was just basically a non-issue in international politics. So this helped generate some first momentum, but at the time there was really no need. There was no need to consider this more regularly than on a 20-year regular basis. And time passed. There was a commission established within the UN to deal with human settlement issues, but it really remained a sort of low-level issue. And in 1996, there was a little more momentum when Habitat 3 happened in Istanbul, and the Habitat Agenda was agreed. And the Habitat Agenda basically was a huge catalog, over 200 pages, of how urban issues should be, of why they're important, basically. It's really to be understood as a manifesto as to the relevance of cities for general development, but there was nothing tangible about the Habitat Agenda in 1986. This was basically a statement saying, okay, we have understood now, it's a really important issue. 4 years later, when the MDGs were adopted, this helped to translate the need for I think it was MDG 7, the significant improvement of 100 million of slum dwellers. I'm sorry, I don't remember the number correctly. But we learned much later that this goal, this target within the MDGs was actually went too short. It didn't really generate the necessary input to really tackle the issue of urban development in the long run. In 2008, this is just a fact that outlines the importance again. We surpassed the level of world population being half of sort of living in cities 50%. So this is a turning point, because now urban issues really become a lasting and important issue also on the international level. And with the SDGs, then it was recognized to have urban development as a key issue, not only concerning slums or so, but in a general integrated way. Cities were recognized with their own target, with their own goal, in this global agenda. And this time around, Habitat was not before the adoption of those global goals, as in 1996 and 2000, but it actually follows that summit. So the momentum that it generates, that it can add basically to this agenda, is much more catalytic than it was back in 1996 and 2000 when it was the other way around. So this again gives a brief overview of what I just said about basically the status of the conferences when they happened, Habitat 2 and Habitat 3. I don't need to repeat this. Just one thing that I want to add is that I'll get back to this in a little bit as well, but Habitat conferences and especially Habitat 2 have really set milestones in terms of stakeholder participation. So generally, of course, member states are the ones negotiating and sitting at the table with these UN processes, but Habitat 2, for the first time, really broke this this understanding and managed to get the voices of civil society and especially local governments included in the process. So because of that, it's been expected, and I think it's been fulfilled to a certain degree, that Habitat 3 will build on this and set new landmarks and new examples, precedents for this kind of inclusive process and stakeholder involvement. Now, looking a little bit at this year and what's happening with the Habitat 3 conference in concretely, you can see that in May we have the zero draft of the new urban agenda being released. Up until then, and basically starting in 2014, there was a long and inclusive process of generating input and consulting with different groups, both governments, civil society, experts, about what the content of this new urban agenda should be. And I dare say that a vision sort of has emerged from that, or many visions, so to say, as to what this document should be. Having said that, it's obviously difficult for the document to make all these visions, realize all these different visions from so many inputs and so many voices. So basically, what we had leading up to May was one stream of expert group meetings through generating issue papers, generating policy recommendations. Here, UN agencies were involved, urban experts were involved that member states basically suggested should take part in the process. So that's one stream that we had building up to the zero draft. A second one are the meetings that took place. Some of you might have seen or heard of those regional and thematic conferences that all generated declarations. Sorry, was there anything wrong? No, okay. That gathered input from the different regions as well as from different sectors. And then thirdly, there was a wide range stakeholder consultations with different mechanisms really catering to the zero draft. First of all, through the General Assembly of Partners, that's a platform, a stakeholder platform that was initiated through the World Urban Campaign within UN Habitat to organize major groups and other stakeholders, this standing term as it's recognized by also the UN General Assembly, to partake in both the drafting and the negotiations of the agenda. And we had World Urban Thinkers campuses. There were 25 or 26 of them organized all over the world, bringing together on a local and regional level volunteers, individuals, interested parties to come together and discuss the city we need. And that's also what the outcome document from all these campuses is called, the City We Need 2.0, in fact, building on an earlier version that the World Urban Campaign had launched at the World Urban Forum in 2014. So all of these inputs built into or sort of were taken into account when the new the zero draft was drafted, and with its release, a time of intergovernmental negotiations started. So in May, June, and July, governments and delegations gathered in New York to negotiate this zero draft, and there is a revised version of that zero draft, in fact, now. So second version, we'll have a third version of it by mid-July, and PrepCom 3 in Surabaya, upcoming in July, is really anticipated to be the turning point in this process, where hopefully delegations will be able to build sort of a first consensus of what of the issues that should be covered in this agenda, and hopefully then we'll be able to adopt this document in Quito. Now, looking a bit at the new urban agenda, I just want to give a brief overview of what the structure looks like at the moment. So there's basically two parts. We have a wider declaration on cities for all. This is sort of the vision of the document. And then the second part, that's the sort of more concrete implementation plan for the agenda. And here, again, we have three subheadings that look into commitments, implementation, and follow-up and review. Now, the first part, part A, those commitments, they're basically a way to take all that political will and all those commitments made throughout 2015 through others, through the SDGs, through COP21, to break down that thinking onto a local level, on sort of a policy level. And B, effective implementation, is supposed to then talk about those mechanisms and sort of initiatives that need to be taken up to really make those commitments happen. Section C, follow-up and review, considers the way this agenda will then be well reviewed and followed up throughout the next 20 years, because obviously that's a very long time, and the attention to the urban realm needs to be kept up in one way or another throughout this time. Both making sure that governments don't lose interest and making sure that those who are implementing the commitments will be able to have some peer review, some input on whether they're doing well or not so well, and how their work can be improved. Within these three parts, there's obviously issues that are so far not consensual. So in part A, some of the member states are calling for a right to the city to be acknowledged. This is a very contentious issue, and many governments disagree on basically creating new language when it comes to human rights. Everyone agrees that there should be a rights-based approach in this agenda, but this is an issue. In B, effective implementation, really an issue is the decentralization and the local governments aspect of this agenda. And in aspect C, there's the role of UN Habitat and sort of the follow-up that the SDGs are going to play in this process. So Germany has been very active in this for a long time, and basically has been building its involvement on three key messages outlined here: empowering cities as development actors, really making sure there's decent environments for all in cities, and realizing integrated urban development. And these are also extended a bit and sort of amalgamated with stakeholder input in the Berlin recommendations that were adopted in Berlin this June at the German Habitat Forum that took place as sort of a German input into the Habitat 3 preparations. Now, looking beyond Quito, if we manage to adopt this agenda in October, there's a question that remains to be answered because there's, as I said, it's difficult to sort of break down these clear commitments into really actionable and consensual terms. So after adopting it, obviously it will be a sort of legally binding document, yet the language used in the document so far is not 100% committing everyone. Large parts of the implementation will depend on initiatives taken up by member states. and also building on existing initiatives that are there. So GIZ and BMZ are obviously sort of I guess ahead in this game a little bit, having a large portfolio of successful initiatives already, and are always being looked at for, I guess, advice also from fellow governments to see how to really bring this agenda forward. So that's what I'm going to end on, this note that the implementation effort will depend to a large part on the readiness of actors in this field to advance and to build on this agenda that really builds the ground for it, but is not yet the sort of key to really making it happen on its own. So I guess with that, I'll hand over to Barbara.
Hello to everybody. I don't know if we go on with the presentation or if we have a small. Okay, so yes, I will go on with my presentation. I wanted to talk a bit more about the contents of the Zero draft regarding climate change and resilience. We first in talk about the challenges of climate change and urban development, or the relation between urban development and climate change. We know that cities are drivers of climate change because of the resource consumption and emissions. I think that the numbers shown here in the slide are well known by everybody. We have a special impact also on food security. We have urbanization and the growth of urban areas concern in an important way the agricultural areas that are important for food security, for food production, and as of course the whole risk management issue, especially regarding floods, droughts, coastal areas and deltas, extreme weather events, and so on. So we have the role of the cities are both drivers and victims of climate change. On the other hand, and the Paris Agreement was very clear in that the cities are important actors in the battle against climate change. And there are a lot of options for local governments in developing solutions and being actors against climate change that are wider and more important than, in many cases, than the national governments. And here we have these four important points: proximity to people and understanding of needs, the knowledge and innovation hubs, the economies of scale, efficiency gains, and the mayors as champions for initiating change. These are contents that were as well discussed in Paris and are part of the Paris Agreement. I think that the participants of the webinar know the contents of the international agenda of COP21 and the Paris Agreement. Maybe 2 points or 3 points that are important. One, that the Paris Agreement talks about this, to keep temperature rise below 2 degrees and pursue efforts for 1.5 degrees goal. This 1.5 degree goal was pushed a lot from the local governments, and both points, 2 degree and 1.5 degree rise of temperature, is included now in the new urban agenda as well, explicitly. We have this point with loss and damages. I think this point is important because here we have important
perspective on prevention, not only reacting about on risks and climate change, but to prevent it and to adapt to mitigate it. So that's I think it's a because that links the discussion from climate change to urban planning and urban development, and the action options we have through spatial development that is more adjusted to the necessities of climate change. Here we have this is literally what the Paris outcome, the Paris Agreement says to the role of the cities. Explicitly, they don't talk about cities, but they talk about the engagement of all levels of government and various actors. The recognition of adaptation as challenge for all levels and key components of long-term global response, and the capacity building to foster country ownership of parties, including at national, subnational, and local levels. So there is in several parts they mention the local level, and that is a recognition of the special role, a special contribution of local governments in the battle against global warming. The same is included in the Paris outcomes regarding the decisions. Here we have explicitly mentioned the cities, including cities, uphold and promote regional and international cooperation to mobilize stronger and more ambitious climate actions by all parties, including cities. The capacity building is, again, we talk about the subnational level, and the non-party stakeholders, that efforts are welcomed, and invitation to scale up needs to strengthen knowledge, technologies, etc. So now to enter in the issue of the zero draft and how what commitments are included in the zero draft regarding climate change. There is a clear notion of the new urban agenda as an instrument for implementation of international agreements. This is included in the declaration and in the vision, in this what Max talked about, the first part, the preamble of the new urban agenda. And there is an explicit link to COP21 and to the Sendai framework for risk reduction. The zero draft calls for an integrated approach to social inclusion and climate change related adaptation and mitigation strategies. I think that is a very important issue, a very important topic and perspective, because there is an integrated view on inclusion issues and environmental and climate change topics. So that is very important for the new urban agenda, and there is an integrated view on the importance of linking governance structures and spatial planning. And governance structures including legal framework, including financing mechanisms as well. The other important points that are included in this bullet is urban-rural linkages and increased resilience. So we talked about in the beginning words, Lucy talked about we have to think urban, and I think one of the big discussions in the whole debate of the new urban agenda was if it's really urban or if it's more spatial and territorial, and that we have to widen our perspective on regarding urban issues, talking about the urban-rural continuum, including what is happening in the rural surroundings of the cities and in the city regions. And this for climate change and resilience issues is a quite important change of perspective for urban policies and for urban actions. A special point that is important for the German government is the importance of resource-efficient infrastructures for transport, water, and energy supply, and this is also included in the zero draft. The numbers you see here, 10, 50, 51, 53, are the articles where explicitly the zero draft is talking about climate change and resilience. The zero draft highlights the necessity of improving multi-level institutional and regulatory frameworks adequately linked with adequate finance mechanisms. This is explicitly linked also to climate change adaptation, mitigation plans and actions. So this integrated approach to urban policies, where we talk about planning instruments and planning processes, but as well about the institutional arrangements and the finance mechanisms are also included in or mentioned and include commitments regarding climate change and resilience, and this is included in the Article 65, 86, and 121. Here in the next slides, I included literally the articles. I don't know if it's necessary to see it, but we had a long discussion, and it's in the moment we have this negotiation process in New York among the parties, and there the wording is quite important. So we can skip these slides, but we can afterwards in the discussion go back to it again if you want it. I included it because really in the end of the day you always discuss about specific words. We had a discussion lastly with the European Commission about low carbon or carbon neutral development and how to include it, what specifically the Paris Agreement says about it, and how to include it in the new urban agenda. So the wording is not it is important in this case, so I included it. So, but I would suggest to skip it in this moment and go back to it if we see that it's necessary in the discussion. But here are all the articles included that in a way mention climate change and resilience. So the last to conclude, what are the conclusions of it? If Habitat 3, the zero draft, means really a paradigm shift towards sustainable and inclusive urbanization, including climate change and resilience. I would say, in general terms, that the most important aspects, targets, and action areas for mitigation of the impacts of global warming and resilience are included in all the essential chapters of the new urban agenda. The new urban agenda is conceived clearly as an instrument of implementation of these international agreements and explicitly talks about the COP21 and about the Sendai framework. In our comments to the zero draft in this last version, Germany suggested a more differentiated wording related to specific aspects. So we see that there is a big effort on shorten the document and to sharpen it a bit more and to use a wording that is based on international agreements. But in our perspective, if you simplify too much the wording and the document, then there is a certain danger to lose aspects that are really important for sharpening the commitments. So in our suggestions to the European Union position, we suggested to be more explicit in regarding certain aspects like production, consumption patterns, resource efficiency, food security, housing policies, transport, risk-prone areas, and so on. And on the last point, Germany would appreciate an explicit commitment regarding the development of capacities of city governments, especially when regarding the management of the national resources, increasing resilience, and to develop regional and local adaptation strategies. According to financing requests, sometimes in the new urban agenda, in the different versions, we saw that there were included topics regarding regarding climate change and resilience in the specific chapters about this issue, but when we talk about financing, when we talk about capacity development or institutional arrangements or legal frameworks, then we lose it a bit from our view. So that was our suggestion in general terms to be more explicit in these special issues. I would like to close with this document. It's a report from the German Advisory Council on Global Change that was published in April 2016. It's quite new. It's, I think, one of the most important contributions from Germany to the debate about climate change and urban development. The name of this document is Humanity on the Move: Unlocking the Transformative Power of Cities, and there's the link where you can get it. It's published in English as well. There is a a short version and a long version of this document, and I think it's really this document really sums up the dramatic, or presents really the dramatic dimension of what climate change and resilience means for urban development, and what we always were talking in the new urban agenda process in the Habitat 3 debate was the paradigm shift that we need. But where we could discuss a long time if really the zero draft is aiming to this paradigm shift in the dimensions we really need it. So with this, I would like to stop, to close, and open the discussion.
Dear Barbara, dear Max, thank you a lot. That was a very good insight into the background of the 17 goals, the outcomes of the zero draft new urban agenda, and also the contribution of climate change and all the aspects on spatial and urban development on the discussion. So I see a lot of our participants applaud, and I think it's a great insight also why we are doing this webinar. I know you are also offering these kind of exchanges from a GIZ platform, and we thought it's quite useful because a lot of people ask us like, what is the current status, and can I get more information? So I think also the participants and the registrations we now got shows that there's a high interest, and I would like to also ask our participants if there are any questions to the speakers. I see Felix is raising his hand. Felix, you can use your microphone. Just demute him. Yeah. Unfortunately, we cannot hear you, Felix. You can also raise your question in the chat on the left side below if you feel. Yeah, it seems the microphone is not working. In the meantime, does anybody else want to raise questions to the speakers?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear
Yes,
you.
now we can hear you.
Okay, sorry for keeping you so long. I'm a newbie concerning Saba, this virtual meetings. My question would be, I heard from both Max. Thank you very much for the presentations, first of all. Then I heard from Max that this empowerment of municipal governments is an issue, at least in this declaratory part of the new urban agenda, and that countries like China are opposing this empowerment as a or declare. And Barbara mentioned on the other hand that there are paragraphs that do mention the importance of strengthening the governance, the multi-level governance. Now, my question would be to both of you, how do you see the chances that this aspect of empowering cities to pursue a sustainability agenda is really pushed at a new level through the new urban agenda, through the paragraphs that there are, by providing more clarity what is needed. Because I think coming from a research point of view, it is quite clear that competences must be clearer, and of course resources must be allocated at the subnational levels of provinces and municipal governments. So is there clarity? Is there a clear direction of this kind that could really empower municipalities in the long run?
I mean, so just as a sort of a forward to that question, the zero draft that we have at the moment, of course, is not yet the final conference outcome text. So there's still negotiations ongoing, and we might see weakening or strengthening of some paragraphs yet to come. Having said that, I think that obviously the main point of this agenda is exactly just that what you said, strengthening local authorities in their capacities to contribute and play their role in the realization of sustainability. And I dare say that also outside of the agenda, everything that's happened around this process has contributed to generating this kind of a momentum. So the entire preparatory process, with its wide and broad inclusivity, has already, I want to say, unlocked a lot of potential on local level issues, even if then they might not be reflected directly like that in the text of the new urban agenda. And yet, yes, there are these disagreements with countries like China, who call for formulations like strengthening local authorities regarding different national realities, or so there will be kind of like softeners like that in the text.
Okay.
The aim is to be as concrete and as direct as possible, of course, but as it is with these international negotiations, there's a lot of interests playing into the formulations, and so I guess we're sort of trying to get the best outcome possible, which will be a compromise, naturally.
Yes, because the negotiation is between the national governments, or with the national governments. So it's clear that there are certain conflicts between national governments and local governments, and this was accompanying the whole debate in which way really we can open or include more specific commitments regarding the role of local governments. But I think in general terms, local governments or multi-level governance is already so positioned, very well positioned in the whole debate. So it will be difficult. There will be some compromise formulas in the new urban agenda, because you need a consensus about it, because that's how United Nations works. But in general terms, I would say that this important role of local governance is already so well positioned in the whole debate, as well in the Paris Agreement, so that it will be quite difficult for national governments to really do some sabotage about it. I think that will be quite limited. And if you see the specific articles, then you see in this number 50, given you see where it is mentioned always the local governments, that they have to be included in planning instruments, in legal framework, in the institutional agreements or arrangements, and in finance. So it will be quite difficult to block this.
Thank you.
If I may just add one more comment. I've said it already in the end of my presentation, but what really can make the difference here I think, is not only the text of the New Urban Agenda, but also the engagement that follows from it. So how ready will countries be to make this issue a priority, not only at home, but also abroad? And Germany can be seen as an example here. The kinds of initiatives, including CDIA, including the partnership that we're building with C40, those are, I guess, pilots or examples that that provide the kind of detail and the kind of sort of concrete examples that that the New Urban Agenda in its text maybe can't provide, but through its momentum might be able to.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you a lot. For now, I don't see more questions. We still have 5 minutes, so if anybody has a question, please feel free to raise the hand. In the meanwhile, I would also like to ask a bit, I mean, you're now talking about the whole broad topic itself and also the draft itself. So for us here working in the in the countries and in city intervention, it is quite important on how to localize these SDGs. And from your perspective, also from the headquarter and linking these different interventions, also seeing the regions, how to cope with it, what do you think will be the main challenges for the cities? Really like to understand what are the SDGs, how can I fulfill the requirements or the expectations also, because it's still a quite a topic on a meta level, but how to bring it to the cities and to our partners on the ground, like where do you see the entry points to both of you?
It's a very broad question, and I think we would need more than 5 minutes to talk about it. But maybe to pick out only one issue that could be interesting. An important entry point we identified is food security, city region food systems. When we talk about urbanization and urban growth, then we talk about the changing role of rural areas as well, and they are losing importance and attractiveness for the people to live in rural areas, and this has a certain boomerang effect on living conditions in the cities, and we already know that poverty and hunger now are becoming much more urban phenomena than rural phenomena as they were before. And on the other hand, food security and city region food systems are an interesting entry point to connect rural development with urban development and resilience and climate change and environmental protection and inclusiveness. So I think that would be, for instance, an interesting entry point where you can identify action options for local governments, but also for intergovernmental cooperation and the coordination with other levels of governments from the national and regional level. So I would, but I think we would need more than 5 minutes to talk about that. But maybe that was already an interesting point for the participants here.
Okay, there are some more questions also I see from first Burkhard and Julia. Feel free to directly approach. Maybe the microphone is not working. There was another question also from Vaishali. What role can GIZ play in further in fostering this agenda in the countries? Like, what is the actual role of GIZ?
That's the million-dollar question. I think that this is something that needs to evolve now on the basis of this agenda. And that question doesn't only go to GIZ, but to all the other implementing agencies and partner countries and donor countries. And as I said before, I think there's a lot of innovation in this field, and a lot of things that are worth trying and piloting. But really, this agenda can only give a basis basically for this kind of engagement. It can strengthen and encourage further initiatives furthering this field of work. So this question goes a little bit beyond sort of what the agenda can really tangibly spell out. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, it's the question for all of us and for the next months, years.
Maybe.
Yeah, definitely for all our programs actually. How are we able to contribute to these goals and bring it in the local context? So a last question here from Teresa Kerber.
Hello to all. My name is Teresa. I had the opportunity to attend the last European Development Days along with Eileen and Friederike. And there are a lot of discussions in the European Commission, in the EU, on localizing the SDGs, owning the Global Development Agenda, and multi-stakeholder approaches for sustainable urban development. And I got some information yesterday from the colleagues working in the European Commission, because JSET was also hosting some brainstorming sessions, and they are preparing reports on the brainstorming sessions and also on the brainstorming session about localizing the SDGs. As long as we get the information, we can share it with you in the platform of the TurboClick working group in TUEVAS and SNGA sector networks, or maybe send the links directly to Lucy, Eva, and Vaishali, and they can forward the information to you.
Thank you. Actually, we have Friederike here with us, who...
That's great.
I'm here sitting with Max and Barbara, and I wanted just to add one point on what kind of role GIZ could play in furthering implementing the agendas, so to say. I would say, I mean, for us interesting, I think, is you advising national governments, then going next step and analyzing where are the gaps in order to make the agenda run, so to say. I mean, how, analyze together with your national level governments what is missing, what kind of tools and instruments national level has to create. Maybe there are policies, there are laws missing or already existing which have to be checked, and then advising them what you can do to implement the agenda. On the same level, if you work directly with local governments, you could do the same. I mean, analyzing where are the gaps, where are the strengths, where is really need to act in the future, and advising them in the process, making them aware that for them these agendas are important, and transforming it into concrete steps on local and also national level. At the same time, of course, we here in the sector global projects are advising. We are looking at the monitoring part on the one side, like how can the monitoring and the review system from local level to national level to international level work, and generate policy learning also, not only creating data and and check the data, but to have a policy dialogue between the different levels, what happened and what has worked and what has not worked. Yeah, maybe these are a few points. I think there's a big role we can play on different levels, and we have to connect. At the same time, we are getting now, it's starting now that we get initiatives from international organizations and networks, like I would name SDSN, maybe you know that network. There are also others, of course, the Global Task Force and UCLG. They are all working on this, so it's very important, I think, to connect with these partners and to partner with all these organizations who are putting a lot of thoughts on how to do it, how to advise the process. And I think we, as GSZ, as an advising organization and really a process-oriented organization, I think we can have a good added value in this process.
Thank you a lot. Also, thank you, Teresa, for sharing now the links. Before we come to an end, it's already well in Manila 5 o'clock. So my question is also because right now the next meeting or the next big event will be in Surabaya, PrepCom 3, as Max already mentioned, and I think a lot of the programs will be here. So just from the participants here, can you please raise the hand if you will be in Surabaya? And also a question to Max and Barbara. From the headquarters side, I guess you have an overview. Who will be there? From CDIA, I just want to mention we will definitely be there, engaged in several side events also. And I want to organize a face-to-face meeting. It will be on the Tuesday, the second day, 26th of July, so you are more than welcome. If you are in Surabaya, Lucy and I, we are preparing like a doodle, so you can also enter what time is suitable, and just to have an hour also discuss on what are our programs, perspectives on the process, where we will be working more, and especially on upcoming events, and to better link us in the region.
We have an overview of what events are going to be taking place, but not in front of us. So I don't know it by heart. It does look, though, so the Indonesian government actually, or the representative from Indonesia, presented the plans and all the outlook towards Surabaya in New York last week, and it looks like it will be a great event also outside of the negotiation rooms. So there's a lot of space for exhibitions and side events and speaking and exchanging ideas. So it'll be a great part of the process, I think.
Yes. From our side, the director of this of the sector program about metropolitan regions will be there, Carmen Vogt and Katrin Eisenbeiß. They're very interested in this kind of networking and face-to-face meetings. Our perspective in the program is towards city regions, metropolitan regions, not understood as mega cities, but urban agglomerations. And we think that that's a quite important approach to urban development that includes not only urban areas, but peri-urban and rural surroundings as well. And this is important for different questions like infrastructure, like resource efficiency, climate change, and the impact and the real impact of the measures that local governments can take. So there is, I think, an opportunity to talk with both and to include them into these invitations. We would appreciate it a lot.
Great, thank you a lot. So I'm looking forward to see you all in in Surabaya, or some of you will meet in Quito for sure. A lot will happen, and yeah, I think we are on the best way also on this yeah, draft on aiming to acknowledge the role of the cities as drivers for transformation and sustainable development. And with these words, I would like to thank you all, also Friederike, a lot for organizing the contribution. We know the work in the background, and especially for Lucy for her support, and for sure, yeah, the speakers for their contribution, and we are looking forward to for the next exchange and invitation. I'm always trying to make it possible, and thank you for offering to 2 meetings. Thank you a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. And we appreciate the applause a lot. Thank you.
Hast du auch geklatscht?
All right.
Okay.